extremism that targets democracies.
Talk a little bit about your simile, which spoke of India and Canada being like an ant and an elephant.
Well, in this case, look, Canada is, of course, an important country to the United States. It's the world's largest undefended border, that thousands of kilometer-long border between Canada and the United States. We have economic partnership and so forth. But when it comes to strategy, when it comes to national security, there's been growing frustration with regard to Canada. First of all, this isn't the only issue we have with Canada right now in the United States. Canada, there's a wide bipartisan feeling, hasn't upheld its defense obligations, which is one of the reasons why it hasn't been included in the AUKUS partnership, which is becoming a much broader alliance. At the same time, we're naive if we don't talk about the rise of China. China is, of course, the greatest strategic concern the United States faces right now. We're actively pivoting away from the Middle East for that reason. And because of that, India is our chief ally. We don't want to be dragged down into a pointless political diplomatic fight simply because of Justin Trudeau's personality and because he decided to shoot from the hip. I don't get the sense from hearing any of the statements that American officials have made, including the American ambassador in Canada, David Cohen, that the United States was caught by anything other than surprise when Justin Trudeau announced this 9 days ago or so from the parliamentary floor. Now, when it comes to U.S. intelligence sharing with Canada, the murder of Nijjar happened, and then we weren't paying close attention. We gave Canada what intelligence we may have had. And what we do know from the New York Times and from others is that while our intelligence helped color and give context, it didn't provide a smoking gun. That Canada did on its own. And now there's a sense that Justin Trudeau is trying to blame others for his own mistake. Look, as a Pentagon official in the past, I consumed intelligence. I received the reports from the CIA, from the National Security National Security Agency, and so forth. It's like having pieces of a jigsaw puzzle. It seldom gives you a clear picture. Policymakers never have a clear picture to their comfort when they need to make a decision. And in this case, it would be no different. Justin Trudeau is lying if he suggests otherwise.
Let me pick up this last point about the US having shared intelligence, but not having possibly understood what Trudeau was going to do with it. And as you said, they're pieces of a jigsaw puzzle. There was no smoking gun in there. The Canadians have wanted to stress again and again that this intel came from the Americans. When the American ambassador to Canada did in fact concede that some of the intel would have come from the Americans, the Canadians used that as code for, hey, the Americans are on our side in this. The other narrative prevailing is that the Americans knew about this well before the G20, that the Biden administration prevailed upon Trudeau to not sabotage the G20 and not raise this in public, but did not necessarily know that he was going to raise it in this manner in Canada's parliament.
I think that all may be true. You know, when it comes to giving context, again, that context could have been the murder of Rapudaman Singh Malik. That could have been that there were other Sikh elements out there who were gunning after Nijjar. There's a lot of context. Now, when people after the fact say, oh, Canadian intelligence have warned Nijjar that there was a hit coming on him, that could also be some elements within the Sikh community in Canada trying to simply benefit from this crisis. I wouldn't necessarily take it all seriously. When it comes to the G20, was this an issue that was discussed behind the scenes? People might have said, India, did you have anything to do with this? And Prime Minister Modi has said, no, this wasn't on us. And let's also be blunt. If it comes to something like signals intelligence, Indian security is too professional to talk about doing anything like this on the open phone lines. That's why also this is unbelievable and why there's a crisis of confidence in the way which Prime Minister Trudeau has handled this. Now, when we move forward, what Justin Trudeau will do, I don't know, but this has been a hit to the Five Eyes. Because when you do share intelligence, you want that intelligence to remain secret. You don't want to set up a situation in which it needs to be exposed. If you want to blame someone politically, and that's a cost. let's compare this to Jamal Khashoggi, a man who I knew who was murdered by Saudi agents in the Istanbul consulate in 2018. In this case, the Turks were willing to come forward and provide the proof right away. They were willing to sacrifice the fact that they had bugged the Saudi consulate in Istanbul. If Justin Trudeau is not willing to do any of this, he should have kept his mouth shut, especially when there is no proof. And let's not forget, the premier of British Columbia has said that he had not seen any definitive proof. He's simply seen a glorified Google search. This reminds me a little bit of the run-up into the famous British dossier about some of Saddam Hussein's weapons of mass destruction ahead of the 2003 Iraq War. In that case, the British, when they had presented a dossier, had basically plagiarized from a scholar who was shocked that his work had become the basis for this. I'm not exculpating the Americans in the Iraq issue either, but I'm saying that there is there's a parallel to the intelligence simply not being there, and intelligence agencies saying, trust me, that no longer works.
Yeah, that's a great point. The comparison to the WMD and the falsified evidence that we now know to be falsified, and nobody knew it then. What do you think might happen next? Because let's talk a little bit about China. The fact is that again and again, there are people here wondering, okay, who benefits from all of this? And who benefits from all of this is China. And ironically, Trudeau's also come under fire in his own country for not calling out Chinese foreign interference fast enough. Right? How do you see sort of the geopolitical ramifications of this? Do you think right now China is having a chuckle because there's clearly an attempt to drive a wedge, in the Western alliance and between India and America?
Having a little, certainly China's having a little bit of a chuckle, but China's situation, China's domestic problems are so great. This isn't going to be enough to derail the relationship in any meaningful way. If anything, when you break a bone, it grows back stronger, and this is what China needs to worry about. Canada might now be a bit of a weak link, an unserious link in our relationship, but this will be addressed. Certainly, the relationship between Canada and India is not in deep crisis as it may seem. It's a relationship. The crisis is between India and Prime Minister Trudeau. One of the ironies here is when the Indian press handles this issue, they will say Justin Trudeau is in over his head. He's made a mistake. When most of the Canadian journalists handle this issue, they say, Justin Trudeau is in over his head. The fact of the matter is, when you have that solidarity, that symbiosis, that the relationship is going to survive. China is a broader problem. Look, the crisis between India and Canada doesn't go anywhere close to the crisis between India and China over China's encroachment on Arunachal Pradesh, for example. And therefore, I'm not so worried in the big picture. But you're right. The United States is looking at this through the China lens. They keep telling Canada, stop trying to distract us, especially for something that may not have a basis in fact, at least not in the context which Justin Trudeau is trying to put out.
If push comes to shove, because Canada is one of the oldest sort of partners of the United States of America, if push comes to shove and the Americans need to choose a side, what might the Americans do given the China factor?
Ultimately, it's not going to come to that unless this becomes a populist issue in the U.S. Congress. But ultimately, the United States is simply going to try to run down the clock, to use a sports metaphor, until Prime Minister Trudeau is out of office. He's on borrowed time already. At most, he can survive until the year 2025 due to his agreement with the New Democrats, a left-leaning party inside Canada. But the fact of the matter is, snap elections could be held at any time. Most Canadians expect it. And therefore, we're hoping we don't need to make that decision. But every single month, every single year, we become closer to India. And there's a sense that whatever disputes we may have with Canada, and again, remember, Canada blockaded their border with the United States over COVID. It created a lot of tension, especially in border cities like Detroit and so forth, that those issues, we don't look at Canada the same way. And I hate to say this, in the American political context, it's both a Republican and Democratic thing. We're not prioritizing traditional alliances the way we once did. We have been throwing traditional allies under the bus, including Israel, including Saudi Arabia, including at times France. There's no reason why we wouldn't do the same thing with regard to Canada.
Fascinating. Let me ask you one last question. Do you think the Americans behind the scenes would be trying to de-escalate this crisis? And if so, what might a de-escalation involve? Because if Trudeau doesn't put public, evidence in the public domain, his own people are going to say to him, why did you do this? And if he does, it's going to escalate things more with India, because India is flatly going to deny it. We already have some idea of the human and signals int, which effectively means that Indian officials were under surveillance. That's what it kind of boils down to. And as you've already said, nobody who's smart and experienced is going to say anything incriminating on an open phone line. So if there is going to be an informal back channel mediation, what might a de-escalation look like?
Well, first of all, I'm absolutely confident that the United States is trying to de-escalate behind the scenes. Now, the Biden administration actually has a lot in common with the Trump administration on this regard. When they are saddled with crises, their strategy seems to be simply to wait until the next crisis comes and the media in the United States forgets the current crises and it goes to the back burner. Who talks about, for example, now, the disastrous withdrawal from Afghanistan? That was never resolved, and yet the crisis has simply moved on. Right now, the United States in Washington seems already to be forgetting the whole India-Canada spat because we have the crisis between Azerbaijan and Armenia. And so there's a hope probably within the Biden administration that if they can just string this out long enough, the attention, the spotlight will move on. Behind the scenes, though, they're probably hoping that Justin Trudeau doesn't say anything to make it worse. And frankly, I think Justin Trudeau and his top advisors are starting to understand this because this is a no-win situation for him politically. He's taken a molehill and made a mountain out of it. And all he's done is focused attention on the grave incompetence with which his administration has dealt with Khalistani terrorism over the past several years.
And in the middle of it all, he also brought a Nazi to parliament.
Absolutely. I mean, it was a bad week for Justin Trudeau.